Okay. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me and trusting me to share something related to academic research and publications. And of course, it is truly an honor for me to be here. And this is also the first time for me to share something to University in Sri Lanka in collaboration with Scienix campus. So yeah, I so much believe we have an important agenda for today's events, and as shown on the screens, I will share presentations on topic of mastering research method in social and psychological research, challenges and best practice. Yeah, in these presentations, there are three main points. First, I will bring you here to discuss the current issues in scientific publications. What is the problem? What goes wrong? Yeah. And second, after I share two things that there have been a lot of issues about scientific publications, then I will try to share briefly the foundational logic of qualitative and quantitative research, how we can call it as scientific research and how to report it in a good way. On the third part, then I will present how to apply appropriate approaches to analyzing social issues. And of course, I will give you a few examples from my research. Okay, so now I will start by understanding the current issues in scientific publications. Let me begin to inform you about Journal of Social and Political Psychology, where I am part of the chief editor here. So since its inceptions, JSPP encouraged research and researchers from the so-called underrepresented societies or underrepresented countries to publish in JSPP. And even now in our policy, we are prioritizing research from underrepresented places. But still, it is not without a problem, and it is so challenging to get quality research from those places, from underrepresented countries. And I think up until now, publication from Sri Lanka is still limited in JSPP. Yeah. And based on our 2026 report, we just published it for 2025 publications. Even though JSPP publication in 2025 are diverse, many regions are still underrepresented. For example, in our publications, European context are overrepresented, and we only publish one article, each from South America and Africa, and only two from Asia. And while we receive more submission from underrepresented countries, many were just rejected for being outside JSPP scope or below JSPP quality standard. Unfortunately, in 2025, we also have three submitted articles were rejected because there is an indication for heavily using AI or artificial intelligence. So even with our new policy, it looks that we still have a long way to go to fulfill our journal's goals in representing a more global and inclusive version of social and political psychology. In my case, even though I have publication in international peer-reviewed journal, I have about 50 publications indexed by Scopus now, but I still feel it's so difficult to publish my research in a trusted journal. And indeed, these challenges are commonly found among non-English speakers. Why? Because English is not the first and main language use. And academic writing in English is like a different role where your score either in TOEFL or IELTS is not a guarantee for your writing. Even if you think that your grammar is excellent, it doesn't mean that you will be good in academic writing. Yes, there are software, yes, there are applications and AI tools that can help you to improve your writing skill, but practicing a lot and commitment to improve the academic writing is more suggested here. The other thing why it is so difficult to improve the writing skill, it is because we have lack of support. Many universities, especially from non-Western universities, are oriented more on teaching basis. And if we found a research project, from my experience, mostly it is applied basis research in which the scientific contribution is difficult to find. But despite all limitations, yeah, I've mentioned previously, most countries, even from global south, including Asia, also Indonesia and Sri Lanka, have high demand and pressure for their scientists to have scientific publications. The problem is, due to the lack of attention to the capabilities, the lack of attention to the capacity, and research ecosystem still being unsupportive, a huge number of publications in questionable journal or predatory journal have become growing concerns in the academic community, which affect researchers worldwide, including those in Sri Lanka and Indonesia. In Indonesia, 8 of 10 professors found to have publication in predatory or questionable journal. Yeah. I don't know yet exactly the exact number, yeah, for academic issues in Sri Lanka, but similar cases with Indonesia are also found in which Sri Lanka professor found for academic publications misconduct. I have at least two concerns related to high pressure for scientific publication and lack of research skill or capacity. My first concern is because of high pressure and demand for faculty members to be able to report scientific publication annually or in a short period of times, and there is a trending issues of unethical practice where a third party help the researcher to complete a scientific manuscript. And this type of academic service is called as contract cheating, and any practice of academic publication where it uses a third party to complete their manuscript, it is considered as wrong and it is one of academic misconduct activities. My second concern is, let's say they have attempted to submit to a credible journal or to very trusted journal. I don't know how many times they did, once, twice, and so on, but all they encounter, all they experience was just rejections, and rejections. And because of their bad experience to a credible journal, to a good journal, then many of low quality papers, many of rejected papers ended up being published in a questionable or predatory journal. And I see that if the issue of predatory publishing scam is not addressed seriously, it could cause greater damage, especially it will affect the academic development and the quality of graduate care about the quality do not care about the content. They don't care about the accuracy of the methodology. They don't care about the theory used. Yeah. Their only concern is to maximize a profit without considering the harmful impact on the development of science. We know that many countries have put its quality standard for scientific publication based on solely through Scopus, in which, in my view, this mindset and practice has put them in Scopus trap. Yeah, I consider Scopus trap as a tendency to evaluate the quality of scientific work primarily based on the inclusion of Scopus Index journal. And this is, of course, worrying, because when one becomes overly devoted to Scopus indexings, and they will be known only for its inclusion in Scopus rather than known for its substance or the quality of the research itself. And in the long run, the content of the research may receive little attention. So this is actually something wrong, because the right one to assess the scientific quality is by focusing on substance, its rigor, and its contributions, not where it is indexed. And as we all know, prominent scientists like Einstein, Alport, Bandura, or Durkheim are renowned for their significant contribution, not because their work as indexed in particular database or rankings. Yeah. To make it clear how damaging it is, so next I will give example publication and cases that give a very bad model. Yeah, this is one article published in the Journal of Survey and Fisheries Science, and this journal was indexed by Scopus. So I would like to know, are you aware of the serious error in this article? Yeah. The major mistake is that it was published in the Journal Survey in Fisheries Science, yeah, where the scope is very far from the topic of this article about Islamic psychology. And this alone shows that the author is completely unaware that each journal has a specific focus and a limited audience within a particular discipline. Another issue is that the content of this article is more like a lecture and contain many claims of justifications that are not based on scientific studies or findings, which is far from what an ideal scientific article should be. And if the quality of this article goes uncorrected and the author believe they are doing the right thing, you can imagine for yourself what kind of work their student will produce. In another case, when scientific publication is, let's say, mandatory, while the environment is not supportive, with the rise of AI use, when we are not ready enough, when we are not creative enough, but many of them facing pressure to have academic publication, then it is very likely they will fully rely on AI. And like this case in Neurosurgical Journal. Now, the journal editor blacklists submission from a certain university in India. Okay. We have found and learned issues related to scientific research and publication in Asia, and it is, of course, worrying. Yeah, and because it is not just impacting the auto research, but it can be the entire university or even the country. Now, let's say that we are here care about it and would like to improve the quality. Yeah. What we need to do is to revisit our understanding first about research methods in quantitative and qualitative. And this is a very simple thing. And I believe most of us here has known about it. But when we talk about research, it is also important for us to see method not just as tool, but method as logic. Of course, we know that qualitative and quantitative methods are analytically distinct approaches, but we also need to know quantitative and qualitative research use different logic in which the goal of quantitative research is to gain explanation based on predictions, whereas qualitative research to understand meaning. And the assumptions developed is also different, in which quantitative research tend to see reality that can be measured, whereas qualitative research see reality as socially constructed. To explain further about the differences between quantitative and qualitative research, their type of reasoning approach is also different. Quantitative research tend to be deductive, meaning it starts with existing theories and test hypotheses derived from them. And qualitative research, on the other hand, tend to be inductive, building concept, interpretation, or theories from the data collected. In terms of purpose and focus, quantitative studies focus on consistency, generalizability, and universal pattern. Yeah, for example, there have been research explaining that people with high aggressiveness are more likely to be involved in fights and verbal violence. And this finding is consistently found across countries and culture. But qualitative studies focus more on uniqueness, depth, and contextual understanding, aiming to understand how and why certain experiences or meaning arise in specific settings. For example, studies seeking to understand how survivors of mass violence come to forgive the perpetrators. Now, I would like to test you, seeing whether you found anything wrong with this statement. Yeah, many of you, I believe, will try to be critical with this statement, but commonly it failed to find the substantial mistake. What is the substantial mistake actually? Okay, now if in point one I change it, yeah, from final year student to university student in Indonesia or university student in Sri Lanka, will it change the relationships testings? And this is also the case similarly on point two. If I change it from generation Z to generation X or generation millennial or generation dinosaurs, etc., will it change to the hypothetical model? Of course, no, quantitative, because quantitative research focus on consistency, generalizability, and universal patterns, as I have explained previously. So adding a context that is too specific is not that needed or important for quantitative research. So I have explained about quantitative and qualitative logic in scientific research. So now I'll discuss how to apply appropriate approaches to analyzing social issues and give you a few example. But before I give you example, there is one thing that need to understand, that scientific journal article are expected to be analytical, not just descriptive. And I'm sorry to say that beginners or less experienced researcher often tend to produce writing that is less analytical and more descriptive. And such writing is typically evaluative, exploratory without a clear theoretical grounding, and often practice oriented. In contrast, an analytical writing style seeks to address questions such as why does this phenomenon occur? Why does it relate to existing theory? And if it's in psychological discipline, and the questions will be why psychological mechanisms are involved. In this sense, analytical writing reflect a more dialectical structure of explanations, moving beyond description toward a theory-driven interpretations. To be clearer, let me give you an example. Yeah, I took this from one rejected paper, which I think can be a good example. The descriptive part is the adjusted model from the original style of the writing, and this style of writing is not suggested, it's not recommended, because everything is too descriptive. And you can see it is so much different when the issue raised adjusted to a more analytical. Okay, I give you a bit detail. Yeah, the more analytical text, yeah. In the first sentence is like initial implications of the problem raised by the author as it is written. The rapid rise of internet use among Pakistani youth reflect more than a demographic trend. And the sentence, from a self-regulation and developmental perspective, young people are particularly vulnerable to compulsive use, is more connecting with the theory. And the last part is like the outcome or the implications result. Yeah. So it will be something like over time, this dynamic may contribute to dependency and negatively affect mental health. So if there is a questions on how to improve the writing quality to be more analytical, my answer is there is no other way than practice, read as many as possible scientific paper, learn and analyze a good paper, and do it like the way they do it, the structure, how they elaborate the paper, and so on. In this case, so practice make perfect. Okay, I have explained previously that in addition to understanding the analytical method you use, it is essential to understand your research logic, specifically when to use quantitative approaches, when to use qualitative approach. Likewise, when you choose to write your scientific research for journal publication, then it is important for you to adapt to adapt your writing style into more analytical. So now I'll give you example based on my populations how to build my research through quantitative and qualitative, and the issue will be around intergroup hate and denial wrongdoing. Yeah, at first I was unsure which research I should share. However, in the end, I thought it would be very interesting to present research on hate speech and how it is mobilized. The study has been published in Analysis of Social Issues frame or constructed way that it is no longer perceived as hate speech. Yeah, de jure, normatively, a speech is defined as an attack, insult, or a mock to a person or group based on social attribute such as religion, ethnicity, race, or gender. And it has been known that in many countries, speech is forbidden and regulated by the law, which I think it is also the case with Sri Lanka, that morally, ethically, you cannot mock or insult people in public just off the blue, just out of the blue. But I argue that in real world setting, the identification of speech as harmful or non-harmful is so dynamic, and that the justification of such speech depend on how it is socially constructed by a dominant majority group. This is evident in Indonesia, where what should be considered hate speech can be manipulated and framed as not being hate speech, while expressions that are not inherently hate speech can be directed or constructed as hate speech. Shortly, then we developed the hypothesized PET model, and without diminishing the importance of other pathways, the core aim of this study is to examine the relationship between perceived intergroup hate and the interpretation of hate speech. Yeah, our target participant here were predominantly from Muslim majority group in Indonesia, and we hypothesize that intergroup hatred may influence how a speech is interpreted, in which such statements that are objectively insulting may not be perceived as containing hate. In study 1, we conduct an analysis of 2 cases in which sermons had been publicly accused of containing negative sentiment and element of hate. However, both were ultimately dismissed legally and judged as not constituting hate speech. But from my analytical perspective and based on my expertise, these sermons, of course, do contain element of insult. So what happened actually? Yeah. In short, as can be seen here, the statistical results show that the more individual harbor hostility, the more individual harbor hate toward outgroup member, the more likely they are able to perceive the sermon as unrelated to hate. Consequently, when such interpretations prevail, apologies are no longer seen as necessary. Now, what about a speech delivered by a member of minority group? Yeah, I chose one example case here, and I call the subject, let's say, C. In this, although the speech included references to phrases from another religion, my academic analysis suggests that it doesn't contain element of hate or insult. However, those who harbor hostility and hate toward outgroup minority members are more likely to perceive C speech as insulting to majority member and therefore believe that an apology is warranted. So what are the implications of this finding? Been rule, even though there have been regulation defining what hate speech is, the way hate speech is defined, the way hate speech is manipulated in real world context, it's shaped by power relation and social status in which dominant or powerful group can influence and mobilize interpretations of what is considered wrong and what is not. Yeah. And I have given you a sample from quantitative research. Now, what would I do if the study were conducted using a qualitative approach? Okay, how can research on intergroup hate and denial wrongdoing be carried out qualitatively, but it is still publishable? And here, as you can see, I will give an example based on the case of Aung San Suu Kyi when she defended her country, Myanmar, against allegation of genocide and crime against humanity toward the Rohingya. We chose to study this as Myanmar case stand out because the alleged genocide and crime against humanity was defended by Nobel Peace winner Aung San Suu Kyi. And here, our study is not to prove Suu Kyi and her argument as right or wrong. Rather, we are interested to first investigate the denial strategies that Suu Kyi, as a leader of Myanmar and a prominent peace activist, inject in to defend her country against the accusation of mass killing. And second, to explore the strategies that Suu Kyi used to defend and protect the in-group positive image. And in our analysis, we identify two main strategies used by Suu Kyi. One is to construct argument to deny the accusation, and another one is to build a positive image of the government, Myanmar government, as morally competent and law-abiding. And our findings show that Suu Kyi inject in something like interpretative denial, a strategy in which perpetrator group acknowledge that some wrongdoing may have occurred but deny the implication or severity of those actions. Specifically, her argument emphasized that the killings should not be classified as genocide because they occur within the context of armed conflict, implying that when two sides are engaged in conflict, accusation of genocide should be reconsidered. And she argued that she also argued that the Rohingya were not only victim but also described as perpetrators. And according to her, every side is wrong and guilty and responsible of wrongdoing. And the other denial argument is that she insists that any misconduct by law enforcement had been addressed by Myanmar government, and suggesting that the Myanmar government has been taking appropriate actions. And in addition, the addition findings, drawing also on her position as a Nobel Peace winner, Suu Kyi also construct a positive image of the Myanmar government by emphasizing that they were committed to the rule of law and aware of the consequences of violations, and it positioned itself as a supporter of peace and justice. So what do this mean? What do this finding mean? Yeah, and this finding means that any group accused of committing crimes against humanity, even when the evidence is clear, when the evidence is there, where the evidence is substantial, will seek way and will seek strategies to evade such accusations, sometimes even by showing that they're either renowned for peace activisms. Okay, and I think I've talked a lot and perhaps too much, so I will stop here. And this is what I can share for today. Terima kasih. Thank you, Stutia Nandri. And there are some of my research. Those are some of my research using quantitative and qualitative approaches. And what about your research? Yeah, thank you.